Lauren sat across from Amanda in their favorite corner booth at the cafe, fingers lightly tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she stared into the dark liquid. Her thoughts swirled in patterns that mirrored the circles she traced, looping back to the same restless feeling that had taken root in her mind. Amanda was laughing about a story from her office, but Lauren's mind drifted, tugged by a quiet voice whispering that there had to be more. "All right," Amanda's voice cut through Lauren's haze, her friend's knowing gaze fixed on her. "What's going on with you?" Lauren gave a slight smile, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Amanda was one of the few people who could see through her carefully placed walls. She didn't have to pretend here. "It's just sometimes I feel like everything is just too steady," Lauren said, her words stumbling out with a hint of guilt. "Mark's amazing, really he is. We've been married for 7 years now. And he's everything I thought I wanted. But I keep asking myself if there should be more than this." "More?" Amanda raised an eyebrow, her interest visibly piqued. "You mean excitement? Adventure?" Lauren nodded, a slight flush warming her cheeks. She hadn't spoken these words out loud before, and somehow, saying them made them feel more real. "I guess it's like everything is perfect, yet so predictable." A slow smile spread across Amanda's face, her eyes sparking with mischief as she leaned closer. "Well, there are ways to shake things up. Have you ever thought about opening things up a bit? Giving yourselves space to explore?" Lauren blinked, taken aback by the suggestion. "Opening things up? You mean other people?" Amanda shrugged, her expression steady. "My husband and I talked about it, and honestly, it's given us a fresh start. A little freedom to explore what we want separate from each other. It doesn't have to mean anything serious. Just some room to breathe, you know? It's actually brought us closer." Lauren was quiet, her mind whirling as she took in Amanda's words. She felt her pulse quicken with a mix of shock and perhaps a tiny flicker of intrigue. "I don't even know how I'd bring that up with Mark," she murmured. "He'd think I've lost my mind." "Just be honest," Amanda encouraged, her voice gentle yet insistent. "It's not about him. It's about you needing something different. Tell him how much you love him and that you need a bit of freedom to feel alive again. If he's as good a guy as you say, he'll understand. He might even surprise you." Lauren took a deep breath, feeling a blend of nervousness and a strange thrill. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe there was a way to rekindle the spark she had been longing for. But beneath that thrill, a small knot of worry began to form, a shadow she chose to ignore, telling herself that this was simply the beginning of a new chapter. That evening, Lauren sat across from Mark at the dinner table, her heart racing as she replayed Amanda's words in her head. Her fingers clutched her wine glass, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She knew she had to tread carefully. "Mark," she began, forcing a calmness in her voice that she didn't feel. He looked up, giving her his full attention, and his familiar, steady gaze made her heart ache. "Yes." She hesitated, her voice faltering. "There's something I've been thinking about lately. About us." Mark leaned in, a slight concern etched on his face. "Okay, I'm listening. I know this is going to sound strange, but I've been feeling a bit restless," she admitted, glancing away before her gaze flickered back to meet his. "Not because of you or anything you've done. It's me. I feel like there's a part of me that's missing something." Mark was silent, his expression unreadable, but he didn't interrupt. Encouraged, Lauren pressed on. "I guess," she continued, swallowing hard, "I've been wondering what it would be like if we gave each other a little freedom. Just some space to explore, to feel something different. It wouldn't change how I feel about you, Mark. I love you. I just think it might be good for both of us. Maybe we'd come out of it feeling even closer." There, she'd said it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and strange. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of anger, confusion, anything that might reveal what he was thinking. But Mark's expression remained composed, almost too composed. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her feel exposed. "So, you want to open things up?" he asked, his voice calm measured. She nodded, her heart pounding. "Just for a while, just to see what it's like." Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He was silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "I see," he replied, his voice soft but firm. If that's what you need, Lauren, I won't stand in your way. A wave of relief washed over her, yet a strange unease crept in alongside it. His reaction was so calm, so controlled. She'd expected some resistance, maybe even anger. But here he was, nodding in agreement, his eyes distant yet focused. He leaned forward, a faint edge in his voice. But this freedom, this would go both ways, wouldn't it? She felt a flicker of apprehension, but managed a nod. Yes, of course, if that's what you want. Mark's gaze didn't waver, but his expression softened into a faint, unreadable smile. I appreciate that, he said quietly. If this is truly what you want, then let's see how it goes. His words lingered in the air, their simplicity masking something she couldn't quite grasp. The calmness that had once reassured her now left her unsettled, like she'd ventured into unknown waters without fully knowing how deep they ran. Thank you, Mark, she whispered, a tentative smile crossing her lips. But as he returned her gaze, a feeling nagged at the back of her mind, a quiet, insistent voice warning her that she'd just set something irrevocable into motion. Lauren was still reeling from her conversation with Mark when she met Amanda a few days later. She told her about Mark's surprising acceptance, about the way he'd agreed without hesitation. See? I told you he'd understand, Amanda said, her eyes gleaming with approval. He's probably thrilled about it. Men like to act calm, but I'm sure he's excited too. Maybe, Lauren replied, frowning as she sipped her coffee. It's just he was so calm. Too calm. I keep wondering if he's really okay with it, or if he's just pretending. Amanda laughed, waving her hand dismissively. You're overthinking it. He's a grown man. He'll be fine. Now, the important question is, when are you going to get started? Lauren felt a mix of nerves and excitement ripple through her, a thrill that made her pulse quicken. I don't know, she admitted, but I feel like I can finally breathe. Well then, Amanda grinned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Why don't we start tonight? I know a place you'd love. Trust me, it's going to be unforgettable. A spark of excitement ignited within Lauren. For the first time, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Little did she know, the choice she was making tonight would lead her down a path far darker than she'd imagined, where Mark's quiet acceptance would reveal itself as something far more dangerous than she could foresee. The club pulsed with energy, and the air was thick with laughter, music, and the faint scent of perfume mingling with sweat. Lauren felt her senses come alive the moment she stepped inside with Amanda. It had been years since she'd been in a place like this, surrounded by people who moved freely, uninhibited, caught up in the night's thrill. Amanda flashed a wicked grin, her eyes scanning the room with practiced ease. Let's grab drinks. I'll introduce you to some friends. Her tone was light, her movements confident, as if she belonged in this space. And tonight, she wanted Lauren to feel the same. They wove through the crowd, Lauren's heart racing as she let herself be led. Everything around her felt new, charged with excitement. Her nerves faded with each step deeper into the thumping, lively crowd. They reached the bar, and just as Amanda ordered 2 cocktails, a familiar face caught Lauren's eye. At first, she couldn't place him, but then it clicked. It was Charlie, a colleague from work, someone she'd only ever seen in the fluorescent-lit halls of their office building. Here, under the soft, shifting lights, he looked different. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair tousled, a relaxed smile on his face that hinted at mischief. He noticed her and broke into a wide grin, walking over with a confidence she hadn't seen in him before. Lauren, I didn't expect to see you here. She felt a thrill as he greeted her, something about this chance encounter sparking an unfamiliar excitement within her. She smiled, hoping her voice sounded casual, even as her pulse quickened. Same goes for you. I didn't know you came to places like this. Charlie shrugged, a playful glint in his eyes. I don't usually, but I think tonight might be a special night. He turned to Amanda, greeting her politely before focusing his attention back on Lauren. Care to dance? The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Lauren hesitated. But Amanda nudged her with a wink, mouthing, "Go for it." And so, she did. The music enveloped them as they moved on the dance floor, the bass pulsing through Lauren's body, grounding her in the moment. Charlie was close, his movements in sync with hers, his eyes never leaving her face. There was an unspoken connection, a tension that hadn't been there in the sterile office setting. Here it felt natural, almost inevitable. As they danced, Lauren felt the world around her fade. The music, the lights, the people, they all blurred into the background, leaving only her and Charlie. She felt his hand on her waist, his touch warm and steady, grounding her even as her thoughts spun. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in years, a pure, thrilling rush that made her feel alive. When the song ended, they stepped away from the crowded dance floor, finding a quieter corner near the bar. Charlie leaned in, his voice low, a hint of something more than friendship in his tone. "You're different tonight," he said, his eyes searching hers. Lauren felt a blush rise to her cheeks, her heart racing at his words. She didn't quite know what to say, so she simply smiled, her voice a soft murmur. "Maybe I'm just trying something new." Charlie chuckled, leaning in closer. "I like this side of you." The words settled over her, igniting a thrill that swept away the last of her reservations. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was something real, something electric. She felt herself leaning in, closing the distance between them, her heart pounding as she allowed herself to be caught up in the moment. And then their lips met, and the world tilted. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, fueled by a need neither of them had expected. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself, and for a moment, she forgot everything. Mark, her marriage, her old life. In that instant, there was only Charlie and the thrill of breaking free. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Lauren found herself smiling, her cheeks flushed. She had crossed a line tonight, a line she couldn't uncross. But as she looked into Charlie's eyes, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Lauren woke the next morning with a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the night. The kiss, the music, the feeling of being someone new, someone free. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. But now, in the soft morning light, her thoughts drifted to Mark, to the calmness he'd shown when she'd broached the idea of an open marriage. She couldn't shake the memory of his reaction, the way he'd simply accepted her request, no questions asked. It had been too easy, too calm, as if he'd been expecting it. The thought stirred something uncomfortable within her, a feeling she pushed down as she forced herself out of bed. Mark was already up, his briefcase by the door, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. She found him in the kitchen, his back to her, as he poured a second cup of coffee. He turned when he heard her footsteps, offering a warm smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, almost cheerful. "How was your night?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask, especially not with that easy, relaxed tone. She felt a pang of guilt, but managed to smile. "It was good. Just a few drinks with Amanda." He nodded, his gaze steady on her. "Good to hear. You look like you had fun." His words were casual, but something in his tone made her feel exposed, as if he knew more than he was letting on. She looked away, her smile faltering. "Thanks. Are you heading into work?" "Yeah," he replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "Busy day ahead. I'll probably be working late tonight." Lauren felt a strange sense of relief at his words. It meant she'd have more time to sort out her feelings, to make sense of what she'd done. She forced a smile, her voice light. "Well, don't work too hard." Mark nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned to leave. As he walked out the door, she felt a nagging sense of unease settle over her, as if something unseen was lurking beneath his calm exterior. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just her own guilt. But deep down, a small voice whispered that Mark's calm acceptance might not be as innocent as it seemed. Over the next few weeks, Lauren's life transformed. She found herself texting Charlie almost daily, their conversations light and flirtatious, filled with a playful energy that left her smiling at her phone like a teenager. It was an escape, a thrill that lifted her spirits in a way she hadn't felt in years. But with each message, each secret meeting, the guilt gnawed at her. Every time she came home, She felt Mark's calm, steady presence as a weight, a reminder of the life she was slowly leaving behind. He never asked questions, never pried. Instead, he offered her a serene smile, as if he were truly happy to give her the freedom she'd asked for. And yet, there were moments when his calmness felt almost calculated, his quiet acceptance a mask she couldn't see behind. It made her uneasy, left her feeling as if she were waiting for something to happen, something she couldn't quite name. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Mark's voice broke the silence. "So, how's Amanda?" he asked, his tone casual as he took a sip of his wine. Lauren blinked, surprised by the question. She's fine." Mark nodded, setting his glass down. "I figured you two would be spending a lot of time together. She seems like a good influence on you." The words stung, a subtle edge to his tone that left her feeling exposed. She forced a smile, trying to keep her voice light. "Yes, she's been a good friend." Mark's gaze held hers, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad to hear that. I want you to be happy, Lauren. Truly." Something in his voice made her heart race, a strange sense of foreboding creeping over her. She managed to nod, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." But as the night wore on, that feeling of unease settled deeper, burrowing into her thoughts like a seed of doubt. She tried to push it away, telling herself that this was simply her own guilt, her own fears. Yet, in the back of her mind, the question lingered. Was Mark's calm acceptance really as simple as it seemed? Or was it the calm before a storm she couldn't yet see? Lauren's relationship with Charlie deepened over the following weeks, each encounter leaving her feeling more liberated, more exhilarated. They met in hidden spots, exchanging stolen glances and secret smiles, the thrill of it all intoxicating her. Charlie was charming, attentive in a way she hadn't realized she craved. And with every meeting, she felt herself slipping further into this new version of herself. But with the thrill came an undercurrent of guilt, a tension that resurfaced whenever she returned home. Mark remained calm, almost too calm, and every time she walked through the front door, his steady gaze would follow her, assessing, as if he were reading her mind. He didn't ask where she'd been, didn't probe into her nights out with Amanda, but his quiet acceptance began to feel like an unseen weight pressing down on her. One evening, she gathered her courage to address the growing distance between them. "Mark, how are you feeling about this arrangement?" He looked up from his work, a faint smile crossing his lips. "It seems to be making you happy, and that's what matters, right?" She hesitated, searching his face for any sign of resentment or bitterness, but all she found was his usual calm. I don't want this to hurt you." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Don't worry, Lauren. I have my own way of dealing with things." His words lingered in her mind, vague yet unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his calm was masking something darker. But as the weeks stretched on, she found herself distracted by the excitement of her new life with Charlie, even as Mark's quiet demeanor continued to haunt her. When Charlie invited her to a party one Saturday night, Lauren was both nervous and excited. The idea of a night with him, surrounded by new people in a private, secluded setting, was exactly the escape she needed. She told Mark she'd be spending the evening with Amanda, and he'd merely smiled, telling her to enjoy herself. The party was held at a large house on the outskirts of town, the rooms filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and music that pulsed through the walls. Charlie was waiting for her at the door, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. He took her hand, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to friends who welcomed her with open arms. The energy in the room was electric, and Lauren felt herself swept up in it, letting her worries drift away as she leaned into the night's excitement. As the evening wore on, Charlie became more openly affectionate, his hand lingering on her waist, his gaze intense. They found a quieter corner, and he leaned in close, his voice low. "I've been wanting this for a long time, you know." The words sent a thrill through her, and without thinking, she leaned in, letting the world blur around them as their lips met. It was a kiss filled with urgency, a need she hadn't felt in years, and for a moment, she forgot everything: Mark, her guilt, her carefully constructed life. There was only Charlie and the feeling of freedom he offered. But as the night wore on, the thrill began to wane, replaced by a nagging sense of unease. She found herself looking around the room, scanning the faces of strangers, feeling as though she were being watched. Shaking off the feeling, she tried to lose herself in the music, but the sense of unease remained, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. The next morning, Lauren woke in a haze, her mind filled with fragmented memories of the night before. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her actions settling over her. She'd crossed another line, one she couldn't undo, and for the first time, the thrill of it felt tainted. When she returned home, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, his expression as calm as ever. She braced herself for questions, an interrogation, maybe even a confrontation. But all he did was offer her a faint smile, setting his mug down with a quiet clink. "Have a good night?" he asked, his tone casual. Lauren's heart raced, and she forced herself to meet his gaze, searching for any hint of anger or resentment. But his eyes were calm, almost too calm, and she felt her stomach twist. "Yeah, just some drinks and dancing," she replied, her voice shaky. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good? You deserve to have fun." She couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on, that he was watching her with a silent knowledge that left her feeling exposed. But he didn't press her, didn't ask questions, and as the days passed, his silence became a presence of its own, heavy and suffocating. It was a week later when the first hint of Mark's plan surfaced. Lauren was going through her work emails when she noticed a strange look from one of her colleagues. She brushed it off, chalking it up to her own paranoia. But as the day wore on, more colleagues began to avoid her, their usual friendliness replaced by cold, polite distance. She tried to ignore it, but when her supervisor called her into his office, her heart sank. "Lauren," he began, his expression grim, "we've received some concerning information about your recent activities. There have been complaints about unprofessional conduct, and I'm afraid we're going to have to open an investigation." Her mind reeled as he laid out the details. Personal messages, photos, all things she thought had been private. She felt a wave of nausea as she realized that Mark must have been the one behind this, quietly collecting evidence, preparing to dismantle her life from the shadows. When she returned home that night, she found Mark sitting in the living room, his expression calm as ever. She wanted to scream, to confront him, but the cold detachment in his eyes stopped her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. He tilted his head, his gaze steady. "I'm just making sure you get what you wanted, Lauren. Freedom." The word hung between them, twisted and bitter, and she felt the full weight of his revenge settle over her. Over the next few weeks, Lauren's life crumbled. The investigation at work escalated. Her reputation shattered as more details emerged. Friends distanced themselves, and even Amanda, who had encouraged her to pursue her freedom, grew cold, her support disappearing when the consequences became too much to ignore. Her phone calls to Mark went unanswered, his presence in her life reduced to a formal wall of silence. She tried to reach him, to explain herself, but it was as if he'd vanished, leaving her alone to face the fallout. One morning, she found a note slipped under her door, a message from Mark's lawyer confirming their divorce proceedings. The words felt like a death sentence, a final blow to a life she destroyed with her own hands. She sank to the floor, the paper crumpled in her hand, her mind racing with memories of everything she'd thrown away. Desperate for closure, she finally managed to arrange a meeting with Mark. They met in a quiet, neutral setting, a small cafe where they'd once shared happy moments. But now, the warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling silence as they sat across from each other, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. "Mark, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to end this way. I thought this would bring us closer, somehow." He looked at her, his expression unreadable, his calmness more unnerving than ever. "Lauren," he said quietly, "if you really believe that, then you were blind to the damage you were doing from the start. I loved you, trusted you. But when you brought up this idea of an open marriage, I knew something was already broken. So I just waited." Her heart twisted at his words, the finality in his tone cutting deeper than she'd expected. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I thought we could fix it somehow. He shook his head, a faint sadness in his eyes. You didn't just make a mistake, Lauren. You broke our trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't come back. You wanted freedom, and now you have it. Enjoy it? He stood, leaving her alone in the cafe, his final words echoing in her mind. She'd gambled with everything she had, and now she was left with nothing. In the weeks that followed, Lauren was left to pick up the pieces. Her career was gone, her friends scattered, and her marriage reduced to a memory she couldn't escape. She spent her days in isolation, haunted by the choices she'd made and the life she'd lost. She often thought of Mark, of the calm, quiet revenge he'd enacted, a plan so meticulously executed that it left no room for redemption. She had gambled everything for a taste of freedom, and now, all she had was the hollow echo of her own mistakes. In the end, Lauren found herself truly alone, the weight of her choices pressing down on her with a relentless, unforgiving force. The life she'd once taken for granted was gone, leaving her to face a future shaped by the mistakes she could never undo.